Hello everyone, welcome at the webinar on how creative ideas can help us solve complicated problems. My name is Anna Fedas and I work for the Stefan Batory Foundation as a bilateral and regional coordinator by the Active Citizens Fund National in Poland. And I'm honored to be your host today. But what is important to mention is that the webinar is the common initiative of Lithuanian-Polish partnership and cooperation. It was organized by the Open Lithuania Foundation, fund operator of the Active Citizens in Lithuania, and Stefan Batory Foundation that was mentioned before. And also very important information is that the idea to meet and discuss this topic was born in the Lithuanian-Polish seminar in Krasnogruda near Seine at the Lithuanian-Polish borderlands. Representatives of civil society organizations from these two countries voted for this topic as the most important for the work and decided to have this webinar as a follow-up of our seminar. I see that we have here our participants from the seminar in Krasnogruda. So I'm very happy for that, and I would like to welcome you especially and thank you for choosing this topic and voting for it. And now it's time to introduce to you our wonderful experts, practitioners, and speakers of today's webinar. So please meet Valentina Papeikiene. Sorry, I learned how to pronounce it, but of course, so sorry if I mispronounce it. Senior advisor from the Teacher Education and Civil Society section from the European Wergeland Center in Norway. We have here also Agnieszka Awin, social anthropologist working with the Roma community in Vilnius. We have Gediminas Andriukaitis, director of the festival Inconvenient Films and project manager of the platform Inconvenient Film Class. Maciej Zabierowski from the Auschwitz Jewish Center in Poland. And unfortunately, Margaret, our fifth speaker, couldn't be with us today, but she sent us recording and she will be with us, of course, spiritually. So Margaret Amaka Ohia-Nowak, editor-in-chief of the Dictionary of the Empathic Polish Language. And as I mentioned before, if you have any questions to our speakers, please use our chat or your camera. So there will be time after all 5 presentations to ask questions and of course receive answers from our speakers. So now I would like to give the floor to our first speakers, to Valentina. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I tried to share my presentation and I tried to be concise, as Sandra has instructed me. So please let me know if I go very much over my time. I dare say I will present more traditional approaches, dear colleagues, and I'm sorry for this, but I hope it provides also a space for reflection and looking at the different materials we already have at our disposal to work in these issues, and also to remind us that what we work with are difficult, are sensitive, and are controversial issues. So looking at some of the materials that the Council of Europe has produced and our experience with them. But before we go ahead, a short introduction. I represent the European Wergeland Center. This is a center established by the initiative of the Council of Europe and Norway in 2008 to support educators, education institutions, and policymakers in promoting values of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law in and through education. Now, of course, you probably know this approach, learning about, through and for democracy and human rights. One of the documents that we work with is this Charter for Education for Democratic Citizenship and Human Rights. This is the child-friendly version. I see people nodding. Fantastic, you know this document. If you don't, I recommend it. Now, when we work with democracy, human rights, and intercultural understanding, as I mentioned, we usually work with relatively traditional methods. I put this in quotes because, in quotation marks, because methods where the learner is at the center, methods that are experiential, might be traditional for the non-formal sector. But when we see—
I'm sorry to disturb you, but we still see the first slide of your show. Can you? Because I know.
Okay. Yes. Now, I'm not sure where the issue is, but is it okay that I continue maybe this way then, just to avoid this difficulty? Yeah. Okay. So I hope you see the, yeah, I just take this out. Okay. So, right. So we are working with the traditional methods, but traditional that in the sense that they're more traditional for the non-formal education sector. I think in many education sectors across different countries, there's still this frontal idea of the teacher preaching to the students and the students following the lesson plan. And we work a lot with the formal education sector. So when I say traditional for us, but perhaps not for others. And this is something that we need also to recognize. Now, I try to put down here the manuals that are specifically maybe targeting issues related to intercultural understanding of the Council of Europe. These are some bookmarks, a fantastic manual to combat hate speech, a manual All Different, All Equal, and a manual that we have also helped develop is a signpost teacher training module for teaching about religions and non-religious worldviews in intercultural education. This is a new manual, and it provides also an overview of what the teacher should keep in mind when they engage and talk about these issues. You see also here this butterfly, please signal with a hands up or some kind of wave if you have seen this framework, something that we use to develop the competence of democratic culture. And what I think is very interesting that here is often outlined by our experts that also work with this is that this also specifically underlines the values. Because if we look at any of the competences in this framework, for example, empathy, you can, of course, be very empathetic towards those that you recognize as belonging to your group, but you might not have the same empathy for others. So values here, for example, value of cultural diversity, value of human rights is extremely important. And this is also an extremely interesting framework because it has kind of suggests also a series of descriptors. So it allows to look at what kind of behavior do we want to see, or what kind of behavior prove that we do value cultural diversity, that we do value human dignity and human rights. And for many of our projects, we use this as a guiding kind of learning outcomes when we work with NGO representative schools and young people. For example, if we think about the value of human dignity and human rights, one of the descriptors sounds like this: defends the views that human rights are required for every human being to be able to live in dignity. Every human being. Is this really the reality? Do all of us that are engaging in this conversation feel like this? So this is an important also possibility to reflect going into what kind of behaviors show that we really possess the values of human rights and dignity. And of course, as we work on these topics, the name of this seminar specifically says that we are working with issues that are sensitive and they're difficult and they are controversial. The Council of Europe defined controversial issues as issues which arouse strong feelings and divide opinion in communities and society. And importantly, we look at these issues and we try to resolve them coming from a different base of values. So inherently, when we are confronted with these controversial issues, this is a conversation about values. And I think that this is one of the reasons that it is so difficult to talk about them. But this is exactly the reason that we should tackle them. I know many of you, if you think about valuing the value of valuing cultural diversity, value of human rights, in Poland, in Lithuania, these values, I believe, are contested or denied to some groups. So it is difficult, but it is also a part of the democratic discourse. Democracy is impossible without this dialogue and without learning from each other. We need this. We see that our societies are becoming increasingly more polarized. We sometimes shy away from expressing views that are seen as different, and this causes further polarization, it causes further alienation, and it causes also us to look for answers elsewhere. We know this, I think, in Lithuania, when we think about the division in society on many issues, we know this because we also have some propaganda, and we know that people can find also different sources of information. It is an important dialogue. It creates a space for an important dialogue also in developing our citizenship competences, such as, for example, critical thinking, such as, for example, questioning empathy, questioning your beliefs and values. And for us, those who promote these values, it is also an exercise because you look at yourself and you sometimes ask yourself, why do I feel so emotional? do I really possess these values? How is my view on this subject? So it is an important part of our conversation. And I wonder also, as I was preparing for this being very honest, that in my work, I have thought that also as an organizer of projects, that we don't take on some issues because they are controversial, because we know it will be difficult, because we know it might require a lot from our side. It might be an explosion. We might not be able to protect the sensitivities of other participants, because some views might be charged with hate speech. And I wonder also if you had these situations in your work where you thought, okay, this topic I will not take. I wonder also if you had this situation in your work where you thought that an issue is not controversial and suddenly there was a controversial discussion. Or on the contrary, when you thought the issue is very controversial and you did not see any kind of engagement and will to actively discuss it, and it did not cause the emotional outburst you think it would. So I think we owe it to ourselves and we owe it to others who work with us to recognize that the topics that we work with are difficult and are controversial. And we need to prepare ourselves and we need to prepare others to work with them. I don't know that if many of you have used the manual, Teaching Controversial Issues of the Council of Europe, please comment again somehow so we know. And if you have, comment also how you've used it, where you have found it useful. But in 2016, the Council of Europe, recognizing the need to discuss controversial issues with a specific need to bring these issues into the education sphere, to schools and to teachers, has developed this manual. It can be used for personal reflection and preparation. It can be used to train fellow educators. It can be used also to train your colleagues, and also can be adapted to use with young people, perhaps members of the local communities, perhaps parents. You decide. What is interesting to mention is that the manual has been now translated to 22 languages, including Polish and Lithuanian, and it has been piloted. Initially, the manual actually says teachers and schools, and it is of course designed this way. But I challenge you when you read it to think about educators and learning environments, because we have ourselves used the manual with NGO representatives, with the university representative. Marjana Rafalska, who is here, has run the manual for very diverse groups, from participants to participants from the Russian Federation. And so we see that it is applicable across different subjects and different target groups. If we think about subjects, we think history, xenophobia, prevention of hate speech, and so on. The manual is now a part of, or some activities in the manual are part of our training at the 22nd at the Utøya Learning Center, which is the place where the terror attacks in 2011 took place. It is now a learning center that encourages young people and educators to discuss democracy and human rights. And it's, of course, a very special place. And because it's important, and the whole idea of the manual actually appeared as the kind of the response to terror attacks in France, also in Norway. So it is important, it's an important also reminder what happens if we shy away from these conversations in our discussions, or if we do not assist educators in confronting them. The manual actually gives, it's a training manual. So it gives you very specific activities that you can run for yourself or for others. And it also gives you a kind of theoretical overview, and also gives you tips on how you can prepare, what you need to be prepared for. It, of course, asks you to be personally aware, or us to be personally aware, to engage in self-reflection, to be aware of the nature of controversial issues and their challenging, and the challenges they pose. It also gives you tips on how to facilitate these meetings. So first of all, what is extremely important is that we define the aim. Do we just want to raise awareness on a certain issue? Do we want to show the different opinions around an issue? Do we want to provide challenging views and factual information to challenge a certain outlook or opinion? Do we perhaps want to change opinions? And then for every one of these, we need to divide different activities and different inputs. Of course, we need, as always, to be aware of the environment, but also to be aware of the fact that sometimes we cannot know for sure. So it is imperative to create a safe atmosphere where these conversations can still take place. And the manual provides also some strategies for that, including the understanding of what is the role that you take. Will you be a neutral facilitator? Will you be the devil advocate who will bring in a totally different opinion? Will you immediately state that I have a certain purpose in this event? So it's very useful to go through these and just to reflect on your own practices. What is it that you choose? What is important also is that we, of course, question here with critical approach. Many times when we talk about controversial issues, there are many opinions and people cite many different statistics. If we think about the vaccination right now, there are so many experts out there, and it's not always easy to, come back with a different statistic, for example. But I think it's also okay, because what we can aim to do is we can question, what is this opinion building on? Where did you find the sources? So critically engaging each other, with realizing also that you might not have this expertise to come up with these statistical issues. But what is important here, of course, and especially the manual, after piloting this practice of good guide, good practice guide that has been published in 2020, outlines that, of course, in these discussions, we also have we cannot forget the important role to base our discussions on the principles of democracy and human rights. We need to protect the different representatives of our groups. And of course, although we encourage open opinions, we still need to do it in a respectful way. I present here, I put a question mark, creative ways. Are these really creative ways? I think that the creative ways are coming after this presentation, but some ideas from the manual, to make it easier to discuss controversial issues. First of all, there is a suggestion to use silent discussions. Sometimes it's not easy to speak out and to state an opinion that can be very different and controversial. So an idea would be to write different statements on pieces of paper, and then the participants go around the room writing their different reflections on this, and then they complete several rounds complementing each other on the different issues. Something that I think we will hear more about in this webinar is the idea of distancing. When we use analogies, parallels, when we use forum theater, when we use movies, when we use comic books, perhaps other kinds of materials, so that we don't say you or I, but we rather look from a bit farther perspective. And of course, language here is extremely important. There's also an exercise in the manual that challenges you to change the perspective from you to we, from perhaps your family to society. So depersonalizing it a little bit. And another, of course, way to work on these issues, and I think we hear about this more, where possible, the use of extraordinary learning spaces, because of course, this allows you to shake to the core and to see, especially when we look at museums, when we look at learning centers like the Utøya Learning Center, that if we don't find a way to find common ground on these values, we will be faced with very severe and serious consequences. Now, I think that what is important, what I wanted to end with, is that I think for many of us working in the center, in the center, and also in this sector, these are also issues that are not easy to discuss, because these are values that we internally feel and share. So this is, it's not easy for us also to talk about different perspectives, because I think we feel this very deeply. But I think that it is important to prepare for these discussions, and also to take the strength and resilience in supporting each other, in exchanging these practices, looking at the different manuals and publications that are out there, putting them together and combining them in a way that serves your target group, and combining them with the different creative methods. And of course, also remembering that this is a part of our societies. This is a very important work. And as the Secretary General of the Councils of Europe stated in 2016, very relevant now, dissent, diverse and challenging viewpoints, these are the lifeblood of societies which are plural, dynamic, evolving, and capable of living together peacefully too. So let's take strength in that. This is an important discussion, and I'm extremely happy that we keep it going. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Like, I couldn't imagine a better conclusion of the reflection on the approach to education and to discussion. Thank you very much, Valentina. Keep your questions for Valentina's presentation. And now I would like to give the floor to Agnieszka Awin, our participant of the Lithuanian-Polish seminar. And Agnieszka, during the seminar, didn't have enough time to present her, let's say, the kitchen of her work and her all the reflection that she has. So I'm happy that today we can hear more about it. So Agnieszka, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and I'm very glad to see familiar faces and colleagues from the seminar. Today I will present, let me share my screen, one of the tools we created a few years ago, and during the seminar, surprisingly, lots of you really were inspired by this and you wanted to hear more. And I really want to present you and tell how great and creative tool it can be for learning community history, for empowering community, and also using as a teaching material. So particularly it is a comic book, and me as a already long-term community worker with the local Roma community in Lithuania, we were always looking for different ways, creative ways, how to engage especially children and youth to learn more about their history and also to raise their self-esteem and so on. So 2 years ago, we published a comic book called Draw Me a Road, Illustrated Lithuanian Roma History. And the idea was to fill the empty gap, which is still present in our education system, where there's so little told about Roma history, Roma culture, and Roma current situation in Lithuania. There are not even every history book mentions Roma Holocaust, not even talking about just Roma before the war, in the Soviet times, in the current period, and so on. So we plan to create and publish a new educational tool, but make it very contemporary and available and interesting, especially for children and youth to be used at school. Not only, but mostly for teachers and school children. And the idea was not to do it without the community and with the children and kids we work with. So while creating the initial parts was to empower and engage youth in itself. So they would really go to their grandmothers, grandparents, they would collect all their stories, they would collect their memories from the childhood, and later on they would present the most important elements which represent Roma history and culture for them, because the illustrator who was making this comic book was not familiar with lots of stuff. So kids were basically the tellers of the story. They were the narrators of the story. And based on these workshops with them, the comic book came into being. And here you would see several pictures, several extracts from the comic book. So it travels through the history of Roma in Europe, in Lithuania, and current during all historical periods. And it ends up in the current situation, especially how children and youth experience the environment at school, their well-being at school. The whole comic books is really based on it's a fictional story, but it's based on a true conversations, on the true events which have happened to kids at school, the worries they share with us all the time, the ideas they want to have, the friendships they establish, and so on. So the comic book really travels from the appearing of Roma on the European continent and going through then the Holocaust, the Soviet times, and forced sedentarization until current times. It was also very important for us to make it very interactive and include not only Roma history, not only some facts about Roma traditions and customs, but also Roma language. So all conversations are in Lithuanian, but from time to time we added some Romani phrases and sayings so that also the readers who are not familiar with the book, they would learn some Romani words. And in the end, we also had a crossroad. So everyone who would read the book, the comic book, they could check quickly the facts they learned and kind of revise it once again. From our experience, it really works well as a educational tool and community engagement tool, working with different ethnic communities, where you have, but probably not only, but basically if there are some minorities in the society which also have their narrative and histories are being kind of not narrated in official curriculum and so on. So it's a great way to engage children and youth. First of all, to talk to older generation, to establish this generational relationship, and later on to tell their histories and their stories from their own perspective. The book we are very happy with this comic books. It's really used in schools and in different libraries around Lithuania. Sometimes I will also distribute it in different cultural spots around the city. And even this year, I met one person who was talking and saying me, that 1 year ago, he found this comic book in the old town and he was very happy to learn about Romani history. And then it was very happy to hear. So it seems it really works and people find it and people read it and they find it useful for them. We also have it in black and white version. So we use it as just a coloring book for kids. So once again, they are kids who are coming to the center, they're coloring the books, they are revising their own stories, they are reading Roma history themselves, and they are also learning more about their own community and history. As I said already, it was accepted very positively in the Roma community and as well in the wider society, in school environment. And as a recognition last year, this comic book received a National Award of Equality and Diversity, or given by the Lithuanian government. It is sometimes referred as the Oscar of Human Rights. So we are very proud of this, and also all the children and youth who participated are very proud that it was really recognized on the national scale, and it can serve for others as an example how can it be included in the educational activities. So that's from my side. Thank you very much. If you have questions, just...
Thank you very much, Agnieszka. So don't forget about your questions to Agnieszka. You can write them on chat if you are worrying that you will forget them. And now I would like to give the floor to Gediminas Andriukaitis from the Inconvenient Films Festival and Inconvenient Film Class platform. I'm very happy to.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here and to share our experience. I will be sharing with you the project which is ongoing. So it's going to be, let's say, the partial results. So we'll be happy to update it maybe perhaps later how it will go. So as it was mentioned, I represent the organization which is called Inconvenient Films. And basically, what we do is we use documentary films to inspire social change. I will not be sharing any slides, but I placed a link on the chat, so those of you who are interested can have a look at the initiatives I'm going to tell in detail. So basically, our organization is focused on human rights education and one of the things that we do broadly is basically do human rights awareness raising event for a larger society in the format of the Human Rights Film Festival, which is a yearly event taking place in October each year. But then also, if we want to inspire social change, we absolutely must focus on the education, on youth involvement. So that's what we did from the very beginning, focusing also on human rights education in schools and using documentaries specifically for that. Because we believe actually that, you know, high artistic value films can be very powerful tools to not only to provide certain information, but also allow a child or a person to step into someone else's shoes and to experience something. Usually the films that we're using in human rights education for kids are much more simple, shorter, and usually the protagonists are kids themselves, so that we can help kids to relate into those particular situations. And we have to, you know, be let's say honest that the audiovisual content, of course, is much more common among young people, and the habits of consuming media is a bit different that the older generation has. So film can also film this generational gap, and watching a film together, which is a very let's say common way of spending your time when you're a kid now, and watching together with parents or teachers can help, you know, bridge this gap. So then we came to the idea that we want to have to reach with our content to reach even most remote schools across Lithuania, and then we developed an educational VOD platform, which is basically an online website where teachers can have access to documentary films which are pre-selected by our programmers. And also they can not only watch a film in the class together with their pupils, but also they can access these methodological toolkits which accompany every single documentary in the platform. So of course we were super happy about this platform. We have more than 2,500 registered users, and it seems like a success. But then we realized that this is definitely not enough, and we must do much more in order to make the systematic change. And this can only happen if you know, contemporary human rights education methods are used by motivated and qualified educators. Only they can inspire civic activism among youth and pupils. So then we came up to the problem that civic education, well, at least in Lithuania, is sort of part of this formal school curriculum, and human rights aspects are there. But the problem is that usually those civic education initiatives are very, you know, short-term projects. And this formal education, civic education, basically entirely depends on the motivation and qualification of each particular teacher. So how do we ensure the quality of civic education? How do we ensure that it's not only theoretical and boring? When it was mentioned by Valentina that it is quite common that the teacher is providing information and telling kids what to do. And instead, we have to engage the people. We have to, you know, encourage critical thinking. So we came up with this project, which we are running now, which is called Inspiring Systematic Change through Inconvenient Film Class. Basically, we have developed basically a created program for the development of professional qualification for teachers, which we developed together with trainers from the non-formal sector. And one of the key goals of our activities is actually to improve the media literacy and critical thinking, both of the teachers and pupils. And also we wanted to challenge the perceptions, their own prejudices and their own stereotypes. And then, of course, inspire and motivate them so that they can be the ones who encourage civic activism in their classes. So we have just finished the first phase of the project, and basically we developed this professional qualification development program, and then we had a pretty intensive training for 60 teachers. Most of them come from smaller towns, remote towns with, let's say, less opportunity for developing their competences. And I think one of the biggest trends of this activity was that, you know, we used a lot of non-formal educational methods in this setting, and you know, participatory learning, sharing of personal experiences with regards to human rights issues, you know, challenging our own stereotypes, and thinking a lot about, you know, critical thinking, reflection, and encouraging empathy. So basically, these 60 teachers had a 40 hours long in-depth training, and the COVID, of course, was one of the major challenges for us, because we definitely wanted to have this training live. I don't know how about Poland, but at least in Lithuania, the springtime was very, very challenging, and especially for teachers who had this long Zoom session. They were, of course, tired of that. So we were happy that we were able to do it live with have a great group dynamics, and our trainers who come mostly from the, as I mentioned, from non-formal education, were able to really inspire them and create the group dynamics. So at the moment we have a very positive feedback and from the participants, and they were quite surprised actually about the format of the training, because this was something that they were not used to challenge your own thinking, to challenge your own experience, and be critical. This is maybe not the way they were used to in those professional qualification trainings. So this was something completely different. And at the moment, they're saying that they feel much more confident to address human rights issues themselves. They have the methods in their disposal and feel really motivated and inspired to try to now work with the kids. And now we're entering the second phase of the project, when these teachers will be applying this gained knowledge in the classes. Our next challenge is to basically help these teachers with the assistance of mentors and volunteers, so that they can be assisting those whatever the initiatives they will come up with. We will be supporting them. So we look forward for really exciting ideas from all these 60 different schools. And once they return from the winter holidays, we will be happy to work with them on the very practical side of things. How to be active in your own class, in your own community, in your own perhaps town, and what can you do to contribute to the society. So basically, these films and our methods are inspiration, but the end result is the activities and this civic activism, which is very much a practical thing. This is what we are trying to do with our methods and tools. So if you're interested more, please have a look at the links that I put in the chat, and happy to be able to share it with you.
Thank you very much. That was really inspiring. I wish I could attend such a class as I was a teenager. Thank you very much. And now we are moving to Poland, and actually to Oświęcim. And I would like to give the floor to our fourth speaker, Maciej Zabierowski from the Auschwitz Jewish Center in Poland. Maciej, floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Anna, and obviously thank you, everyone. Super glad to be here. It's I personally always find this super rewarding to be speaking with practitioners. You know, this is always like a different level of discussion when you can get to the nitty and gritty of what's important for us. So I'll be doing a small a small presentation, so just please give me a second. Let's just make sure that you got that you're supposed to see my screen.
Yes, we can.
I hope it works now. Lovely. Okay. Yeah. So so this is where I work, the Auschwitz Jewish Center. The building, the two buildings in front of you. This is the front. This is the front view of my institution. The building on the left, the yellowish one, is the only synagogue which has survived to this day in the town of Oświęcim, mostly known under its German name Auschwitz, but there's also a Jewish name Auschwitzin, which will come up again in this presentation. And the building on the right, the white one, this is the Jewish Museum. So we have the synagogue, the Jewish Museum, and also a couple other things that we will not be talking about today. But for most people, when they hear the word Auschwitz, I mean the association, oftentimes, at least in the Western civilization, is fairly simple. So the next thing that you may think about is, okay, how is this institution positioned geographically towards the former concentration and death camps? So before we delve into my project, I will very briefly explain to you that in the bottom left-hand side of this Google Map view, further down to the left, there you can see the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial Museum, which is located on the suburb of the town of Oświęcim, on the left-hand side of the river, and in the top right corner, you can see the location of our institution. So this is the Auschwitz Jewish Center. So it's right next to the river, next to the castle, very close also to the market square. In the old town of Oświęcim, this is how historically the town has developed. So this is fairly like a 30-minute walk. So our institution, the one behind me also, is not located directly right around the corner from the former camps, but it's also not a far walk. Still, this is like two different realities also in terms of geography and the river. This is one of the interior views of our institution. So like I said, we have a Jewish museum and we have also a synagogue. So we are right now virtually in the synagogue in the former women's section. To the right, behind the wall, you can see the main prayer room of the synagogue, which is used quite rarely because the town today does not have any Jewish residents, as far as we know. The Holocaust for the town of Oświęcim was completely successful because pretty much everybody had been murdered. In front of you, you can see part of the museum, and then also to the left, there's also the rest of the museum where we talk about the 400 years of Jewish presence in the town of Oświęcim. Just as an interesting fact, perhaps, just before World War II and the Holocaust, 60% of the town's population was Jewish. The remaining 40% was Catholic. So it was a predominantly Jewish town, but obviously because of what happened during the war, this town is not really associated with Jewish life at all. So our institution is here to make sure that the people who lived in Oświęcim and they were Jews before the war, they're not forgotten. They're not forgotten. Yes, they are remembered. And the project, which I wanted to tell you about in the context of difficult histories and intercultural education, is called Anti-Discrimination Education Academy. And this is a project, actually a program of informal education with the aim of professional development of teachers. The ladies you can see on this photograph, these are teachers, primary and high school teachers from Oświęcim, who are participants of this program. Originally this was a half year program, so one semester program of professional development in the field of anti-discrimination education against the background of history. So the thing here was, and is actually, because the program has been going on for 4 years now, we want to invite teachers to engage with the local history. Our example, our case study is the history of the local Jewish community, right? So we're using the museum and the history of the Jews from Oświęcim as a case study, but we're drawing lessons which can be universally applied to other contexts. So thing number one is the history. Thing number two is that when we approach this history, this is not, and this will not definitely be surprising to you, this is not about facts and figures and general knowledge, but it's rather approaching this history with the lens of social psychology, right? So each time we look at the Jews of Oświęcim or other places, we want to have the perspective of majority-minority relations. What happens if you bring into groups which are different to each other into the same space? How do they interact? What are the things that you can come across? What are the symptoms of certain mechanisms, such as discrimination, for example, and so on and so forth. So this is the lens that we invite our teachers to use to look at not only history, obviously, but also modern day. So the apparatus, the mechanisms that they learn about can be applied both historically but also to today. And the product of the participation of teachers in this program are classroom projects. So here the idea is that upon participation and learning about those mechanisms, about history, but also about different minorities in Poland, the teachers will be able to prepare and run their own lesson or like a longer project about the subject of their choice. And the choice again is quite wide. I mean, they can talk both about historical things, but they can also talk, and they do talk about, modern day LGBT issues, for example. This is all a result of their work. We actually, over those couple of years, we have developed quite I would say, an elaborate philosophy around here. We have mentors, graduates of the past academies who also help in this process. I'm happy to talk a bit more if there's time and if you're interested about how we specifically deal with this. But the success means that this person, or individually or in a small group, has actually implemented a classroom project as a result. So in order to graduate from the academy, you really have to run a class yourself. We're not leaving them like stranded. Now you have this, so now do your stuff. So they're also part of our community afterwards. So there's a bit of thinking in this program, I hope. But the particular focus that I wanted to take when talking about our program, the Academy, is that learning about multicultural past seems to help to reduce prejudice. So learning about Jews in the past, for example, may have a positive effect on your attitudes towards Jews today. And this applies also to other minorities. This is a premise which initially I was quite skeptical about, I have to say, because oftentimes and I'm sure you've been there yourselves, when you see situations where people learn about very gruesome past, about violence towards particular groups, but that really does not affect in any way. You can see Auschwitz, you can be very moved. Let me use this example, but then you can get out of it and you can be as homophobic as you were before, right? And you see this a lot. So it's not an easy thing, but indeed there are, if done correctly, this kind of education can indeed affect your perception. The education about the past of particular people or minorities or groups can indeed affect the way you see those people today. But there are certain things which you have to bear in mind. And I would like to share this. I would like to share this with you. And before I do, I just want to make sure that you don't take my word for granted. There's a bit of research about how learning about multicultural past affects prejudice. There's actually 2 research articles which I wanted to share with you. I should be able to do it now. Worst case scenario, if I don't do it now, I'll share it by email with Anna, and I'll ask her kindly to share with you, because this email is ready to be sent. I just need to hit send, but I wanted to wait until our presentation was over. But anyway, there's a social psychologist from Poland, from the Warsaw University, team of Professor Michał Bilewicz. They have done extensive research over the past decade about different programs dealing with multicultural past in Poland and how they can positively influence the way that students, for example, see, not only Jewish people in the past, but also them today. And there's some also results, some like good practices or things that you're supposed to remember about when you are constructing a project like this. So what I wanted to very, very quickly do is give you like 3 examples of such principles and also show you how we employ them. And we believe actually it's working out pretty well. So thing number 1, and this applies to all kinds of groups, human groups. Not only we'll be using the example of Jews, but obviously this is a universal mechanism. One thing is likeness. So whenever I know that my excellent presenters ahead of me spoke about empathy, among other things. So if you want to invoke empathy, if you want to inspire people to be empathetic, you need to start with likeness, how others are similar to you. And again, in the beginning, when I heard this, and I heard this in a different context, I would say probably like a decade ago, I was quite skeptical, because it seems to me that focusing on likeness, you're running the risk of being ethnocentric. You're running the risk of obliterating differences and treating people the same, but at the same time ignoring the fact that they indeed are different, that their identities are different, that this is something that we're supposed to appreciate. But then what the research says is that indeed, this is not about ignoring the differences, absolutely, but this is about using empathy as the point of arrival. And if you want to be empathetic with other people, if you want to feel their pain, for example, if you want to share the emotions and so on and so forth, the first thing you need to do is you need to focus on the likeness. And in practice, that means, for example, that if you're dealing with let's say a Jewish history of a particular town, what we see in Poland, and I'm assuming this is also true in other parts of, especially in Central and Eastern Europe, is oftentimes you have those like goodwill projects which are well-intentioned, but they're really focused on the difference. So they're portraying Jews in a very exotic way, you know, blowing up the differences, focusing on Orthodox Jews only, right? Where the students who have never had contact with real Jewish people, right, will see this as something really bizarre, something they cannot relate to that much, right? And if you blow this up more and more, if you organize, let's say, you know, a Jewish culture festival, when this is all about the fiddler on the roof, and it's just, you know, those like really not really understood people who are behaving in a way which I don't understand, this can be really hard, and it's hard to relate to. So the advice is that, you know, you start by showing likeness. You start by showing what's in common, and only later you move towards the differences at the point where your students, or whoever they are, your learners, are able to appreciate them. In our case, for example, we use this photograph. This is a real photograph of two girls from the town of Oświęcim. Marta on the left was Catholic. Olga was Jewish. This is a photo which was taken on the first day of school in 1934. So this is 5 years before the outbreak of the war. Obviously, no one at the time would have imagined what would happen 5 years after this photo had been taken. And those two girls went to the same school. The school is still there in the town of Oświęcim. Actually, this is the best high school in the town of Oświęcim. Is a town of 40,000 population. So obviously, it's probably not the best high school in the world, but still, this is something that students can relate to. And well, that story does not have a happy ending, as most of the personal stories of Jewish residents of our town. You can see again the same girl on the photo on the left. This is Olga Pressler 6 years later as a forced laborer, and the picture on the right is a photocopy of a letter of testimony which was written by her brother, who turned out to be the only survivor from the family, because Olga, with both her parents, was taken first to the nearby city of Sosnowiec, and then from there they were sent to Auschwitz-Birkenau, and they were murdered. And the only person from that photo who did survive is the Catholic lady, Marta Świderska. You can see her photo here. She kept actually those photographs, a set of photographs, including the one which I showed you briefly before, as the only things to remember her best friend. And again, this is a very nice photo of a lady. She could be your grandmother, I guess. And this is about likeness. This is again about being able to connect to someone who is like almost just like you, to being as close to this history as personal stories as possible. Thing number two is focusing on local identity. And this, I guess, will not be much surprise to many of you, right? Because we're working with local communities. But on top of just the photo itself, by the way, this is a photo of the Jewish street in Oświęcim. This is one of the streets just outside of the market square. This is where the Jewish life started 400 years before the Holocaust. This photo was taken most likely at the very beginning of World War II. So this is late summer, early fall 1939. And we don't know the identities of the children in this photograph, but it's very safe to assume that most of them were Jewish. And when I say local identity, one thing obviously is the thing that, well, you're engaging with local history, and this makes it, again, closer to the students. That's thing number one, which probably is quite obvious, but maybe a slightly less obvious thing, especially in the context of dealing with difficult history, is the fact that, especially these days, in Poland, for example, speaking about the complicity of the Polish people in the Holocaust is a very difficult subject. And, there are people who are taken to court for this. I mean, and a lot of us know such people. So it's becoming more and more difficult to talk about things such as anti-Semitism, about complicity of certain individuals in the Holocaust or institutions, and so on and so forth. And in this context, going down to the local identity and speaking about or discussing exploring how the action of individuals influenced or impacted, in this case, victims of the Holocaust, is one way to avoid those like grand narratives about Poles, like Jews and Catholics, or even worse, Poles and Jews. I mean, I'm saying worse because oftentimes when you talk about Poles and Jews, it means that you're excluding Jews from Polishness, right? And a lot of Jews obviously felt Polish and were Polish citizens. But all those like grand narratives, and this is what the research says, that when you talk about those large groups of people, oftentimes people feel compelled subconsciously to defend their own group, right? You can't say Poles did this because Poles were rescuers, Poles were this, and you're getting into this fight where it's no more about the historical truth, what happened in this particular community. It's more about defending the castle, the besieged, the siege mentality, and so on and so forth. And what the research says, and what we also found, is that it's really easier, and it's never super easy, but it makes it actually easier educationally to focus also on negative aspects of the community life when you talk about neighbors. This is what neighbors did to neighbors. It's also easier to empathize with your neighbors than with people whom you see as completely different, alien, stranger, and so on and so forth. Again, goes back to empathy. So here, for example, another photograph. This is a Jewish soccer club from before the war in Auschwitz. Kadima. Kadima is a word in Hebrew, which means forward. So these are men who are training soccer in the town of Auschwitz, and they played in the local league. They played against also Catholic clubs. They actually made some accomplishments, not very huge, but still, this is also soccer. This is again something that you can relate to. So it's not only that it's close to you, right? So it's easier to empathize, but it's also, and I know from experience that students, but also teachers like this photograph and the story a lot, but it's also a local club. I mean, we have a photograph of their logo, right? It's Żydowski Klub Sportowy Kadima. And again, it says in Oświęcimiu, so in Oświęcim. This was just a local club, as local as any other, Catholic soccer team. So this is also something which is supposed to help go down a little bit and discuss about the town, not those grand categories, which oftentimes invoke this self-defense mechanism, which makes it very hard to talk about facts. And then finally, something which is personally my favorite category. So to talk about moral exemplars. So people who behave in a positive way, which is a very squishy ground. And I know a lot of my colleagues, especially professional historians, do not fully agree with what I'm going to say now. But it's really important that that when you're talking about difficult histories, when you're talking about traumatizing events, when you're talking about violence, and sometimes also the prejudice and complicity in genocides of large groups of people, you really need to show some positive examples. And this is important on one hand, probably again, quite maybe obvious, because you need to show people the light. You need to show that there's some way out of the situation and that there are some role models which we're supposed to follow. Otherwise, people get burned out emotionally and they're just, becoming nihilistic and nothing makes sense because, when bad things happen, we're all like animals, so why bother? That's thing number one. So pedagogically, this is important on this ground, but also this also ties to the question of dealing with difficult history. And what the research says is that if you just focus on the negative aspects solely, exclusively, you really get people again to become super defensive, right? People, you can't really push people into this situation, your learners into that situation where they're supposed to feel, guilty for the wrongdoing of their ancestors, and you don't show them any positive example. This very easily can get into a conflict. So and there's research from, for example, Polish-Israeli youth encounters, for Polish-Israeli youth meetings, that whenever that people usually Polish students would get very tense before meeting their Israeli teens, right? But then if during that meeting, which was moderated, you included a story of a Polish rescuer, meaning Polish non-Jewish rescuer of a Polish Jewish person, you would get a very significant increase of positive feelings towards Jewish teens. So this is something which is something interesting. The photograph, by the way, this is one of my favorite photographs at all. This is a reunion 60 years after the Holocaust. The lady on the left is a Holocaust survivor from Warsaw, Giza Alterwein, and the lady on the right is one of the rescuers, her peer, who with her parents, Polish Catholic, who with her parents helped rescue the girl from the Warsaw Ghetto, and she kept her. And they only met after 60 years. This is Warsaw Airport. So yeah, long story short, what stands out from the research and also my personal experience is that focusing on likeness first, on the similarities, focusing on local history, and also striving to show moral exemplars. Absolutely not leaving out, the bad stuff, but you really need to show those moral exemplars. This is what's supposed to help you deal with difficult histories in the context of multicultural history. And one example, right, about the moral exemplars from Oświęcim. Sorry, this is a notebook from a Jewish boy whose name was Henryk Enoch. He was born in 1932. In 1939, he was supposed to go to school, but he never did. And despite that, we have a notebook from a year later, 1940, where Henryk was clearly learning Polish. For those of you who know some Polish, you can figure out that these are very simple. These are very simple assignments where you have some random words and you're supposed to put them into sentences. So this is Henryk's notebook. He was 8 or 9 at the time when this was written, even though there was no school, because non-German children were excluded from school at the time. That Henryk's story, and I'll explain this in a moment, Henryk's story does not have a happy ending as well. He was deported with his siblings and parents from the town of Auschwitz in 1941 by the Germans. He was deported to another city called Będzin, and there he died. But what is, and we have a letter of testimony by his cousin about Henryk Enoch, the fact that he died. But the notebook was kept by someone very important in this story, this lady, this is a photo taken quite late in her life, in 1980s, but Jadwiga Marciniak was a Polish teacher before the war. She taught in primary school, and during World War II, when Jewish and Catholic non-German children were excluded from education at all, she actually co-organized this underground system of education. She took in children to teach them, and she also took in Jewish kids. This was extremely dangerous, up to a point where her husband, who was also a teacher, was found out to be teaching children secretly, and he was actually sent to Mauthausen concentration camp, and he died there. But she did continue to teach. And this is her photo from 1970s. She's second from the left, and she's with those students who did serve, her former students who did survive. And this is actually her, who also donated not only that notebook, but also another one. See, this is a math notebook of Henryk Enoch, so the Jewish boy who did not survive the war. So in our case, we're showing her story, again, Jadwiga Marciniak, specifically to talk about discrimination. The fact there were people, and there are people who are able to stand up, to recognize the discrimination, to see this coming, to respond to it, and sometimes at the extreme cost. So let's just hope, obviously, nobody of us here has to face this sort of threat. But this is a very positive example of someone of like a silent hero, right? Using this cliche, someone who does not have a monument, but still she did what really had to be done in that situation, and she tried to oppose that discriminatory system. So that's why we use her example. And like I said, she kept those notebooks, which was also very risky. She kept them, and they were donated to us by her family. So again, likeness, local history, and moral examples as those antidotes for the difficulties in dealing with difficult history. We promote this approach. This is a random collection of assignments by the teachers from the academy as a result of the study of this model, those three elements which I told you about. So they're developing their own. This is just like aesthetically, just to show you what it may look like. And yeah, this is what I had in plan for you. So thank you so much. Sorry for taking probably a bit more time than I initially planned for, but I'll be also available for for questions.
Thank you, Maciek. It was very hard to interrupt because it was really very interesting. And now, last but not least, the fifth speaker will explain us how language can be connected to empathy and how can you use language itself as a tool to teach empathy. And now I will share the screen with the recording of Margaret Ohia-Nowak. I hope you can see my screen, and now I'm playing her speech presentation.
Hello everyone, my name is Margaret Amaka Ohia-Nowak and I'm the editor-in-chief of Polish Dictionary of Empathetic Language, or you may also find it under the name of the Empathetic Polish Dictionary, which was founded in 2019 by Karol Eckert, who is a deputy editor-in-chief right now, and this is an initiative that is supported also by Kamil Kopacewicz, who is a linguist as well as myself, who is also an author of most of the posts. So today I would like to talk to you a little bit about this initiative, which was actually aimed at addressing the issue of empathy in the society and addressing it from the perspective of using the language, of language use. So our initial aim was to actually draw the public attention to the concept of empathetic and inclusive language, but also to the practical use of this language in a daily life, in public sphere, and also in personal sphere on different levels. And I will talk about those levels in a moment. The Empathetic Polish Dictionary is a social media so to speak, initiative present on Facebook and present on Instagram. So I invite you to visit the website, even though we are more active on Facebook recently. And it really was our response to acts of physical and verbal discrimination in public space in Poland, particularly against the LGBTQI community. So it was kind of our initial reaction to this. And we all agreed with the team that this is something that's needed and the society would benefit from it. So we wanted to answer questions like how do we exclude other people and based on their identities through language, often without realizing it. We also wanted to draw attention to the semantics, to the meaning of the words, which are oftentimes embedded in the linguistic phrases, but we don't recognize them on a surface level. So we have to kind of dig into its historical context sometimes, or its societal context, pragmatic context. So these were aspects that were interesting for us and still are interesting for us in terms of the pragmatic use of the language. So how as a result, this was meant to create a space where we could initiate a conversation also with the public about how to speak to build respect and understanding between people. We usually invite different communities. We encourage different communities on private groups or some other Facebook groups that belong to certain, that have certain identity. And we ask those communities how they would like to be called and whether we could publish those results or we could publish what they say, the majority says on our website as an argument that the language should change, for instance. as was, for example, with the elderly communities that we asked how they would like to be called in Polish. So then it turned out that most of the people actually would like to be called senior persons instead of older persons, which was also by some accepted. So there are many instances, or for instance, when we asked kindergarten teachers how they would like to be called, we actually didn't do that initially. We actually assumed they wouldn't like to be, that they would just like to be called in a certain name, so the kindergarten teachers. And then somebody in the comments said, oh, but our community does not respect this word, przedszkolanka. We actually want to be called kindergarten teachers, literally, nauczyciel przedszkola or nauczycielka przedszkola. So this was also kind of very insightful for us. And then because we respect one of the principles of inclusive language, which is deferring to the community that the language that is named by certain word or phrase, then we instantly changed this post and we changed the name that was actually advised by members of this teachers' communities. So empathetic Polish dictionary does not only deal with the naming of groups that are marginalized and excluded socially based on their identity, but we also talk about issues that are related to general problems in the world, so or in Poland specifically. So we also try to think about ways in which we can just be more empathetic between each other, but also for each other, but also how we can just live a more empathetic life. Like, for instance, we were supporting an action in like a social activity in England. We still are doing it for building the little houses for birds and how to name these houses. And also, and it wasn't only about the language, but how to actually spread these houses all over London in the parks, so people can actually feed birds in an empathetic and a correct way. So it's not only about words and phrases that people should use to make people with different identities feel respected and taken into account, but it's also on a deeper level, because we believe that language is just the tip of the iceberg, and oftentimes we have to dig deeper in order to change our behaviors and to change the society. What did we want to achieve with our activity and project? I kind of explained, and we are doing it. We also wanted to invite some participatory kind of input into creating the dictionary. So we wanted other people, I said that we differ to communities, but we also listen to voices that occur in the comments section, or some people write to us privately on Messenger. So then we also take it into account, for instance, if they wanted to address a certain issue on our website. Okay, so I was talking about our aims and goals, but now I would like to also say a little bit about the structure of the dictionary, because it has some kind of tentative structure, even though it's been 2 years already that the empathetic dictionary is available publicly, but the structure it's not so strict, so to speak, but we have decided that we wanted to divide the dictionary into the sections, which we called subsets, and each subset is responsible for particular area of exclusion. So we've got feminist subset, we've got rainbow subset, we've got so-called colorful subset, integrative one, everyday subset, shalom subset, salam subset, and barrier-free subset, and also positive subset. So for example, as you may assume, the feminist subset is responsible for fighting against gender inequality. It fosters gender equality and feminist actions, and on the level of language. It promotes the use of gender forms, so gender neutral forms, but here in particular, it promotes the use of feminatives. There are posts against sexualizations and body shaming, as well as some profiles of the heroines, so women that were fighting for the equality of women. In the colorful subset, we have posts against racism, racial discrimination, addressing systemic racism, but also pointing at recent debates about ways in which people of color, particularly Black people in Poland, should or should not be named. Integrative subset, which refers to notions such as migration, such as inclusion on a societal level, refugee discourse, and so on. Rainbow, for example, let me show you the screen so maybe you can see some of the posts, even though they're in Polish. Hopefully you can get the gist of what the essence is about. So for example, right here on the left-hand side, you've got the kind of a inclusive language dictionary on LGBTQI community, how they should be named. So the rainbow subset actually addresses the issues of homophobia in Poland, and also the issues of non-binary people, particularly, for instance, when it comes to using the non-binary pronouns, which is challenging for many in Poland. So we're trying to, in Polish language, so we're trying to promote that part. On the right-hand side here, you've got a post about generalization, what it means in general, but with many examples from different levels, actually, from different dimensions of identity. Here there is a post which we were referring to on the 3rd of December, which is an International Day of People with Disabilities. So we also wanted to address this, and just some examples: microaggressions, racial microaggressions. So posts like this you can find on the website, but also mental health issues, and also the exclusion of women, as you've got here, for instance, and ways in which women are being harassed on the basis of just the fact that they are women. Mental Health Day, International Mental Health Day, also notions of being what it means to have the experience of being homeless, and so on, but also cultural national holidays, for instance, Diwali, that we try to bring attention to by posting some interesting information, and just this website really is informative, and the project is informative, but at the same time, it has, as you could have heard, it's kind of social impact, right? And hopefully it also contributes to the social change on a grassroots level, at least. Did we manage our achieved goals in the last 2 years? I think yes, we have. Of course, we could have done the better because it's a pro bono initiative mainly right now, so it's also not so easy to keep the team in place together. I mean, the core team, which I mentioned before, Karol, Kamil, and myself are there all the time, and Karolina Rutkowska, who is also a graphic designer of most of the graphics that you could see, graphic designs. But I'm also aware that as an editor-in-chief that this initiative will need more financial support, which we are trying to get right now, actually merging with the big organization, Diversity Hub, which will be supporting our activities. Already is actually, but the official collaboration will be established in January. And our aim right now, so what's kind of missing in our project still, for me at least, and how we would like to develop those goals is, so first thing we've got, so it's educating the market, but we would like to educate the market, so to speak, or we would like to educate the society on a broader level, so kind of reaching out to different organizations, to communities, people who are simply curious and open, but also professionals who would like to develop their skills, for instance. So we'd also like to get into, to deliver, which we have been doing on some levels, expert services like trainings and consulting and eye-opening sessions to different professional groups, but also NGOs and organizations. And the third thing that's really important for me is really to initiate the discussion, to initiate some kind of maybe research, discussion, and to broaden the horizons and to look for solutions on how we can implement the language use, empathetic language use in daily life in more and more spheres. And obviously getting back to education and also educate young people at schools and school teachers and support school teachers by this. Just to finish, I'm looking at the time, so it's been quite a long time I've been talking. I will just show you the website on Facebook that you can visit. It's in Polish. We also have an English version of it, but it has not been yet developed. So we basically need more time and more resources to do that. Yes, it's here. The number of followers you can see here. So hopefully it will be growing, and yeah, we are doing our best. So thank you for listening to me. I'm sorry I could not be with you during the event, but please feel free to send me any questions and be in touch, and let me know what you think or any comments that you may have into this initiative. And I keep my finger crossed for your, for all the practitioners and participants that are listening right now, for your initiatives, and sending you greetings from Wrocław, Poland. Thank you.
Thank you very much for listening. I had an impression that Margaret is almost with us, but as she said, I will forward your questions to her. And now it's time actually for your questions to our speakers. So to give you this, let's say, safe space and safe atmosphere to ask your question, maybe disagree if or discuss some theses and reflections that were shared. I will stop the recording now. But of course the meeting will be continued, and you can use this time to ask your questions and discuss with the experts and speakers that are with us all the time.